Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and I'm super excited for the episode today because I'm finally going to be doing something that I've been meaning to for a very long time, which is to open up the forum for you all and answer all of those burning offset guitar related questions that you all have. I'm hoping to do this every month, and I will be putting a post on socials such as Instagram and here on YouTube, where I will be asking you guys to submit the questions that you all have, and I will choose my favorite questions and ones that I can answer within a reasonable time frame, such as in a single video. And I also use some as ideas for videos in the future. Any questions that I'm unable to respond to in this video, I definitely will be getting back to you, whether it's in the comments or your replies to my story. So definitely look out for that. But without further ado, let's get into it. So this first question comes from Cage Golf or Kage Golf on Instagram, and is a little bit of bridge buzz okay? And what is the best way to tweak? What are we adjusting? So this is definitely a very subjective question because every player's tolerance for how much bridge buzz is okay is going to vary wildly from player to player. For me personally, a little bit of bridge buzz is okay, but you definitely want to make sure what's happening is actually bridge buzz. On guitars such as the Fender Jaguar, as well as the Jazzmaster, especially ones that are vintage spec with the vintage placement of the vibrato, and ones that have these threaded saddle bridges, bridge buzz is very, very common. And one of the biggest reasons why it happens is because the little grubs and screws and sometimes even springs are loose and they cause rattles and buzz and something known as sympathetic vibrations on the length of the string behind the bridge. And some of that stuff is just noise that you definitely don't want. What you want to look out for when you start experiencing buzz is definitely check with your fingers, tap on the saddles to see if you are getting any movement or any noises from loose components on your bridge. If you do have some, it's best to get yourself a little tube or bottle of Loctite 222. This is the purple variant, and you just run a little strip or drip of this along the side of whatever screw or grub that is loose. And then from there, you just reinstall and that's it. Definitely make sure to not go ham with this stuff. You don't need to dip the little screw or grub in this. You literally just need a little line down the side, and that is more than enough to keep that thing from rattling and making unwanted noises. Another thing that you might want to check as well, especially if you've got a rocking bridge, is that your bridge is not sitting too far forward or too far backwards in the thimbles. That is a very, very common complaint for folks, and it's a very common thing even with a good setup. Unfortunately, these bridges do not like to return back to center all of the time, and they will drift over time. And so that is something that when it is leaning up against the edge of the thimble can sometimes cause this bridge buzz. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is definitely make sure that you have a radius gauge or bring it to a qualified tech to make sure that your saddles do match the radius of your fretboard, because if one of the saddles is too low, not only can you potentially end up with a loose saddle, but you might also not be clearing your frets and end up fretting out or actually experiencing fret buzz or some combination of fret buzz and bridge buzz. The second question that I've got here is from George Collin III on Instagram. He asks, how do I know if my Mustang tremolo sits too high? Now, unfortunately, I don't have a Mustang here in the shop to show you guys directly, but basically when you are setting up a Fender Mustang, that cigar bar should be as close to perfectly straight as possible, and adjusting the height of your bridge is relates to the tension of the springs underneath that vibrato unit. So you want to adjust it to the point where that cigar bar, and you can look at the little hole where the vibrato arm or the tremolo arm goes into, and that should be as close to straight up and down, like as close to kind of a 90-degree angle as possible. If that bar is leaning too far backwards or too far forwards, that is how you know that your vibrato is not set up properly. You're going to have serious tuning and stability issues if that is the case. Usually I find that cigar bar, once set up properly, is sitting pretty low. So you definitely do not want, at least with regards to the string gauge that you are using, you do not want that thing to be sitting up too high. But unfortunately, the answer to this question is not as easy as giving you like a measurement, because it's going to differ from Mustang to Mustang depending on the string gauge that you're using, and also which of the notches the tension springs are connected to underneath that vibrato unit. If you want a more expanded explanation of how to set up a Fender Mustang, definitely check out my review of a genuine 70s Mustang that I released a couple months ago. There are some more details on how to properly calibrate the tremolo in that video. So the next question comes from Scala2 on Instagram. Do pot values just place a ceiling on how much high-end signal goes through? And that is absolutely correct. So basically, if you have a 1 meg pot that provides more resistance, allowing more high frequencies to pass through when it is fully open or on 10. And if you have something like a 500K or a 250K pot that offers less resistance and that bleeds off more of the high frequencies to ground, thusly giving you a darker tone. Now, for me personally, I like to have as much high end passing through as possible. So I typically go with vintage correct values in guitars such as your Jazzmasters and your Jaguars. So that's 1 meg pots in your lead, as well as the volume pot in your rhythm circuits. But some people don't want to have to roll down that volume knob, and maybe they want more of a usable sweep. And so in those instances, 500K, for example, can result in a quote unquote sweeter tone for some folks. The Troy Van Leeuwen Jazzmaster, for example, comes with 500K pot stock, and I think those make the stock pure vintage 65 pickups that are in that guitar definitely sound sweeter than they do in other guitars, where they just sound overly bright and shrill and kind of sterile to me when the volume is set to 10. So the next question comes from Pickles and Catsup on Instagram. Static non-rocking bridges, good idea or bad? So this one is definitely going to be subjective and depends on your needs as a player. Now, I have two Jazzmasters on my vintage 1965 Jazzmaster. I am rocking the original bridge on here, that original threaded saddle bridge. It is set up to rock the way that it was designed and intended. I feel like this way on this vintage instrument, I really have a super responsive and fluid feeling vibrato experience. And there's just a different energy to the sound and tone of this particular bridge. No other bridge I have found sounds quite like the original. And for sure, the rocking aspect of this bridge is part of that. Dan over at Tough Set Bridges spoke to me and explained why he went with a rocking bridge design on his bridge. And I think the reason for it was because there is a kind of energy that gets built up and released, especially when you are using the vibrato with a well set up rocking bridge, that you can't replicate on a static non-rocking bridge. Now, the advantages to a static non-rocking bridge obviously is sustain is a big one for folks. Stability. One of the first questions I ask a client when they are bringing me one of their offsets for the first time is whether they are gigging a lot or whether they're going to be in the recording studio sometime soon, because my recommendations for a bridge for them and how to set up the bridge that's on their guitar, for example, if they have a Mustang bridge, is going to differ depending on what their needs are. Now, I find that for guitars that are mostly for home use or home recording and stuff like that, I think that a rocking bridge is fantastic, especially if you can just remember to look down and make sure that your bridge is center when you are using it. It's a little different actually on vintage ones because the holes for the thimbles were a bit smaller, so there's not as much range for the bridge to potentially drift forward or backward. In the thimbles, this pretty much always comes back to center. Same on my 65 Jaguar, but the same unfortunately cannot be said for my AV2 Jazzmaster, in which I have a static non-rocking bridge, the Bell Rock bridge, which I still have to do a review on, but it is a contender against the Mastery bridge, for example. It's got a super simplified design with minimal moving parts, and it's an awesome, awesome bridge. Lots of sustain on tap, and it's nice and bright and musical. And the harmonic complexity on that bridge, because they use cold rolled steel for its construction, is just really amazing. So yeah, I think that if stability is key for you, you want a bridge that you can just set up and forget about, at least for an extended period of time, then I recommend to players a static non-rocking bridge like the Mastery bridge or the Bell Rock. But for folks who are okay to pay a little bit closer attention and care, don't mind centering their bridge every now and again, and enjoy the added dynamics that you may get from a rocking bridge setup, then in those instances, rocking bridge works amazingly. The next question comes from Chuckster on Instagram. How about explaining all the damn switches and positions on a Mar? I'm befuddled. So he's obviously talking about a Mar Jaguar, which is hilarious because the Mar Jaguar is a lot less quote unquote complicated than the traditional Jaguar. So starting with our lead control panel here, we've got your volume. This is your lead control volume, as well as your lead tone. There is no rhythm circuit on a Mar, so there is only a lead circuit here. You've also got your blade switch, right? And when you've got that blade switch all the way towards the bridge, that is your bridge pickup. And the second position is both of your pickups in parallel, right? Your traditional middle position. And then the third position is just your neck pickup. And the final and fourth position, my favorite position on Mar configured guitars, is both pickups in series. This gives you a really thick, almost humbucker tone, because that's basically what it's doing. It's turning both pickups into a giant humbucker. And then up here, where the rhythm circuit traditionally is located on the stock Mar Jaguars, you've got your universal strangle switch or bass cut switch. That is the switch that is traditionally here on a Jaguar. And that cuts off the bass frequencies and helps you cut through the mix a little bit better. And then you've also got an additional bass cut switch, which only works in the fourth position. right? Now, on my custom builds and other people's like to do this mod, instead of having an additional strangle switch on mine, I have an out of phase switch, which gives you out of phase tones in both your series and parallel positions. So just gives you more options on tap, gives you kind of like those cocked wah strat like tones. Anyway, I hope that demystifies the Johnny Marr wiring circuit for you. The next question comes from C. Travis Cornett on Instagram. How much does the modern vibrato placement affect feel and playability? What about tone? So I think he's talking about guitars such as the Classic Player Jazzmaster or the J Mascus Jazzmaster or the Noventa or the Vintera 60s modified. So all of those models have the vibrato moved up closer to the bridge. And they did that for a number of reasons. The primary one, I think, is to fix the fact that for folks who don't know how to set up their Jaguar or Jazzmaster properly, they often will have their bridges, unfortunately, too low, right? Folks will do stupid things like removing the shims and set their bridge too low, and then they'll complain about their guitar not having any sustain or just sounding dead, and the strings or jump out of the saddles. And so being able to have more downward string pressure as a result of that steeper break angle by having the vibrato moved up closer solves a lot of those issues. Now, me personally, I definitely like the vintage accurate placement of the vibrato. I just feel like it is a bit more fluid when set up properly. I do not have those issues that I just discussed because I know that I want a little bit of height on the bridge, at minimum, 2.5, uh, up to 4.5 millimeters, between the base of the bridge and the top of your thimbles or your pick guard even. And so that kind of setup solves a lot of those issues for me. Now, as far as how different does it feel, I definitely think that on those models that I had mentioned, that the vibrato feels a bit stiffer, right? It definitely doesn't feel as smooth or as responsive, but it's not huge, right? I think the bigger factor to consider on those models is that a lot of them do come with subpar vibrato units. So, for example, on a J Mascus Squire Jazzmaster, replacing the stock janky vibrato unit with an AVRI unit is going to result in a much more responsive and fluid feeling to it. Also, these guitars a lot of times will come with tune-o-matic or adjust-o-matic bridges. Those are obviously going to affect the feel as well. And in those, I just, the way that a tune-o-matic bridge is designed and the saddles with those sharp V-cut saddles, those are not the type of thing that you want strings gliding across. At least for me personally as a player, um, you end up with string breakage. It just, at least for me, does not feel right. It works for a lot of folks, right? But for me, it doesn't feel right. And so I think those, in combination also with the fact that a lot of those models also have those screw in vibrato arms, and the springs that come on the import units are not as robust as an American Vintage reissue unit, or even like a Mastery or a Descendant, or any one of the fantastic aftermarket vibrato options that are out there. Those play a much bigger factor into the feel and responsiveness of your vibrato unit than the placement. Now, as far as tone, I don't think that I've really noticed that huge of a difference. Again, those other factors that I just mentioned will play a much bigger role in shaping your overall tone than the placement of the vibrato itself. So the next question is from Kim Jong Singalong on Instagram. He asks, reverse headstock on a Jazzmaster, favorite bridge and favorite vintage style pickups. Whew, that's a three-part question. Reverse headstock on a Jazzmaster. Why the heck not? I've never done one personally on a build, nor has anyone commissioned me to do a build for them that has a reverse headstock, but I think they look awesome. And so, if you want to do that with your build, knock yourself out. Now, the next one is favorite bridge. Now, I've gone through a lot of bridges, pretty much all of the aftermarket bridges available. Maybe not as many as Mark B. Shout outs to him for his super in-depth, bridge deep dives for offsets. He's an crazy valuable resource out there for the offset community, with all of the detail that he gets into with those bridges. If you haven't yet subscribed to him, definitely go check him out. I think my favorite bridge of all time has definitely got to be the Stay Trem bridge. I think the Stay Trem bridge is a good balance of high quality, with not too high of a price, so long as you are buying directly from John at Stay Trem. It just has a nice finish, nice features on it, and it's just really, really well built. You can set it up to be both rocking as well as fixed if you want to. It adds a bit of sustain and stability if you don't get on with the original threaded saddle bridge that might have come with your guitar. And yeah, there's nothing to not like about it, in my personal opinion. I think it's very simple. I feel like a runner up to that would definitely be the Bell Rock bridge. Those ones just came out not too long ago, and those are fantastic because they have a minimal design, as I'd mentioned before. And I really, really appreciate that because, in my opinion, the less moving parts there are on a bridge, the better, because there's less stuff that can possibly go wrong. I'm a big fan overall of fixed radius bridges for that reason. Now, as far as my favorite vintage style pickups. Now, this is super duper hard. I don't know if you can see back there though, but my go-tos, and I'm repping right now for them because Emily and Patrick at EP Customs are just the most wonderful folks to work with. They wind amazing pickups, and I would say that between them and maybe Curtis Novak as well, who has just always been a wonderful dude to work with, who really knows his pickups. I'd say it's virtually a tie between the two of them for me. They both make amazing vintage, accurate pickups, and the flavors between the two are different enough that it isn't, necessarily a direct overlap. And both companies also offer vintage flavors that have a bit of a modern tweak to them. For example, some of my favorite pickups by EP Customs are their fat Jazzmaster pickups. They just give you some more, beast to the tone. And then Curtis Novak has the cones, which literally give your tone some more balls and grit without being in an overly hot territory. So yeah, it's hard for me to choose between those two. I'd say both make amazing pickups, and that's not to say that all the other folks who are making pickups aren't awesome, but those two are my favorite. Now, the next question comes from Aid22805 from YouTube. Is a neck shim necessary? Should a good setup include a step where you at least consider one? So it really depends, right? Because if you have from the factory already a proper break angle or pitch back for your neck in the neck pocket stock, then you don't necessarily need a shim. Some guitars that come to mind that don't need shims are like the American Original 60s Jaguars and Jazzmasters. I have found that those already have a 1-degree angle to the neck pocket and do not need any additional shim for the bridge to be sitting at an appropriate height to have enough break angle behind the bridge. A lot of the Fender Japan guitars that have come out over the past 5-6 years also have that same 1-degree angle. If anything, sometimes the angle is maybe a little too extreme, right? And you might even need to employ a reverse shim if you do not like the, for example, the string tension that you are getting from the bridge sitting a bit too high. So if your guitar's bridge is literally slammed down against your pick guard, then yes, indeed, you do need a shim. And that should be the first place that you look. Now, if you've already got about 2.5, 3 millimeters of height, you likely do not need more. And the key word there is need, right? Now, if you want more string tension or downward pressure on your strings, you want your strings to just feel tighter, then yeah, maybe you can go ahead and add like a sliver of a shim to those ones that already have the angled neck pockets. But what you don't want to do is over shim, because I have seen that time and again where I feel people probably overload on information before buying an offset guitar, and they think that shims are an absolute non-negotiable with regards to properly setting up their offset, and then we'll add a 1 degree full pocket shim on top of the 1 degree that is already cut into the neck pocket. And then I've got a bridge that's sitting like 10 millimeters high from the base of the bridge to the pick guard, which is just too much height. A slew of issues come from the bridge sitting up that high, and that is not what you want. So anyway, I hope that answers that. The next question is actually related as well. This is from Jord Nordstrom on Instagram. What are the best neck shims? So if you haven't already, definitely check out the video that I did a couple months back on why full pocket shims suck, in my opinion. I stand by that story. I've seen it time and again also since making that video. I feel like these full pocket shims not only look goofy as hell when you have them installed, right? And they can be expensive ones. They can be expensive ones from StewMac, right? 1 degree, 0.5 degree. Obviously, the thinner it is, the less of negative effects that you will get. But some folks are using like the 1 degree ones from companies other than StewMac, and I just find that these suck the tone from your guitar, the liveliness, the acoustic resonance of your guitar. And if that stuff matters to you, definitely stay away from these. I just also just don't think that they look good when you are looking and seeing them in there. So for me, the best shim material is your tried and true cardstock. I keep like a little baggie of cardstock. This comes to about 0.5. That's two pieces of cardstock sitting on top of one another. This comes to about like 0.5 millimeters, which is a good place to start if you are needing to shim your neck. And yeah, I've never had an issue with these. Don't listen to folks who say that these are the primary cause of ski jump, because that is a bunch of BS. And definitely go look at the resources and the comments and experiences that many dozens and dozens and dozens of other people have had, with just traditional cardstock shims or inner pocket shims and these, full pocket wooden shims. The end of the day, it's whatever you want, right? It's all going to do the same job. But for me, I'd rather not spend, $30 on little slivers of wood. All right. So the next question is from Trappist Punk here on YouTube. And he asked key indicators for when you really need to take it or your guitar to a luthier. And this can be a very complex and wide spanning question, right? Because there are so many different scenarios in which you should probably take your guitar to a luthier. But I have a very simple answer, and that is if you do not have the scope of expertise, as well as do not have the necessary tools and the know-how to get a particular job done right, then it's probably time to take your guitar to a luthier or guitar tech. Some things that come to mind that are, easy for folks to screw up if you don't have experience and you don't, say, have a cheap guitar to practice on first, or a number of cheap guitars to practice on, is, for example, cutting a nut, right? I have seen folks who have attempted to remove the nut from their guitar to replace on their own. They were read something or saw something where they're supposed to kind of tap the nut with like a rubber mallet and like a block of wood, and these folks ended up hitting it so hard that the rosewood behind the nut like literally cracked off, right? You do not want that kind of situation to happen to you. um I've seen people try to use just general jeweler files to slot nuts, which are not ideal because they don't give you the right shape. They're not the right sizes for the string gauges that are common to guitars. Another one is fret work, which is obviously very, very involved. Refrets, all of those things. If your frets are too low, maybe you have a broken nut or your nut slots are too low, those kinds of things are things that I feel like can potentially cause irreversible damage if you don't know what you're doing. And other things that I can think of very quickly are just, necks that have twists or warps inside of them. Things that your standard, probably at home basic guitar setup toolkit are not equipped to handle. That is probably when you're going to want to take your guitar to a luthier or tech. Overall, I admire people wanting to learn for their own guitars, but I feel like there is a steep learning curve between getting a job done and getting a job done right. And the mistakes that can happen in between are sometimes things that you probably don't want to risk, depending on what guitar you're working on. If you do have cheaper guitars or could buy necks to practice on, like cheap necks for you to practice on, doing this kind of work, then that is definitely best before diving into trying to replace the nut on like a vintage instrument or a custom shop or anything that is of great value and sentimental value to you. All right, our next question is from Jimmy Joe here on YouTube. Are the J Mascus signature pickups the same pickups in his Squire model? And if you were talking about the J Mascus aftermarket signature set, no, those are not the same. The pickups that are available as aftermarket pickups are Alnico 2 pickups. They are meant to kind of be a nod to like early 60s or late 50s, early 60s pickups. They are warm, they're woody, they're kind of like Fender's version of the Seymour Duncan Antiquity ones. And they're great pickups. They do not sound anything like the stock pickups in the Squire J Mascus. Those ones are more of a P90 Jazzmaster hybrid. Those have a thicker construction with a bar magnet underneath because they definitely are more of a P90. They have the screw type pole pieces like a P90, and they just have a lot more mids on tap to those stock Squire pickups than the traditional hollowed out kind of mellow tone that you get from his signature set. All right, and our last question, because I am sure this video has gone on a lot longer than I wanted it to go. This comes from Rocket Doggo here on YouTube. Jazzmasters circuit grounding, thimble or vibrato? Ground components individually to shield or common ground to a single pot? Now, this is a question that I've actually gotten a lot, and for me, it doesn't matter. So long as you've got continuity going from your ground on your input jack through all of the different components that do need to be grounded, such as your pots, your switches, your shielding, and your shielding plate, if you've got one, or shielding that you've got underneath your pick guard. So long as you've got that, continuity throughout the circuit, then you should have no issue. So for my builds, whether I'm using aftermarket bodies or genuine fender bodies, those typically already have the ground hole to the vibrato. So that's the one that I most commonly use. But some already have the grounding to the thimble. And I don't find there to be really any big difference with regards to which is quote unquote better. And in fact, I don't think there's any difference at all, so long as all of those things are grounded and your strings as a result and your bridge are also grounded, then everything is good. Now, with regards to grounding the components individually to a shield or common ground to a single pot, that also doesn't matter. I typically do things the traditional Fender way. So if you look at a Fender, Jazzmaster, or Jaguar wiring diagram and it tells you to ground to a shield, I'll typically do it that way. But sometimes maybe I will just go with the back of a pot, right? It's just not as clean, right? Seeing all of those grounds going to the back of the pot, and that's one of the reasons maybe I don't usually do that. But at the end of the day, it's all doing the same thing. So you can do it how you personally prefer. Anyway, I think that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you all had as much fun as I did, and I hope this was demystifying for those burning offset guitar questions that you all had. What did you all think? Did you like this kind of video? Should I continue to do this every month? Open up the forum to you all so that you guys can ask me directly the questions that you have for your offset guitars. Definitely let me know down in the comments. And if you have additional questions that you want me to consider, yeah, leave them down there. I will definitely look back at this video before making the next one. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell for new videos as soon as they drop. And please don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars tech tips.